Here are 3 questions that I never expected to hear. The first one is, are Michelle Obama's arms really that toned? Secondly, and weirdly enough, I got this question more than once, which is a little bit concerning to me, but what does Michelle Obama smell like? Which is a really specific question. But lastly, and most understandably, I get, wait, hold up. You met Michelle Obama? And my responses to these questions in order usually are, yeah, it makes you feel pretty bad about yourself. Fruit, I guess. And yeah, I know I was completely surprised as well. So, some background. I didn't somehow make my way past the Secret Service and sneak into the White House. Last October, actually, I was selected as one of 5 high school students to read my poetry at a private reading ceremony hosted by the First Lady herself. And there's a very unflattering photo of me, unfortunately. It is up on the internet. Yeah, I don't know why I look so sad. I think I was just like super tense, and it translated into that expression on my face. But trust me, I was really excited. So during the ceremony, I actually ended up sitting next to her, and it's a bit scary and amazing at the same time. But at one point, she leaned over, and I was totally freaked out at this point. And at one point, she leaned over and told me, "Congratulations, you have a great year ahead of you." And I eloquently said, yeah. So despite my ability to like not be articulate at all, I actually don't want to tell the story of how I went to the White House, and I could go on about the ceremony and the First Lady and how cool she is, but that's not really the story I want to tell. And I'm actually not a big believer in telling them chronologically. I grew up hearing sometimes stories need to have, in English class, stories need to have a rising action, a turning point in the middle, falling action, the end, it's resolved. And in theory, that sounds pretty nice, but real life is never like one story arc, and real life story arc looks more like this. And there can be more than one beginning and one end, and sometimes you don't really know where the turning point to your story is. Weirdly enough, my story doesn't actually start from me meeting the First Lady, though that'd be like a nice linear place to start. Like I could go up from here and meet the president, but I think in reality, this is it. I peaked. So this story, my story, really begins March last year, my freshman year of high school, on a Saturday, I think. So picture this. I'm sitting in the middle of my room with my camera set up on a tripod in front of me, and I'm holding a sheet of paper with a bunch of paragraphs highlighted. I adjust the camera to face me, and for a moment I sit there completely still. And the words from the script I'm holding don't tumble out of my mouth like I want them to. I just kind of sit there. Several days earlier, I got this letter in the mail that told me that I was selected as a semifinalist for the National Student Poets Program, which is the nation's highest honor for youth poets presenting original work, which is kind of a funny title considering the relatively smaller populations of youth poets in the United States. But if I got to be one of the 5 national student poets chosen annually, I'd get to serve as a youth literary ambassador for the Northeast region of the United States, which is a lot less important than it sounds. But basically, I get to go to DC and read my poetry at the White House, meet amazing artists and writers from across the country, and hold community poetry workshops in my community and local regions. So it'd be a pretty cool experience, and I get to do what I loved. This letter also had statistics in it, and what I'd done was I'd submitted a small poem to a writing competition called the Scholastic Art and Writing Awards, and on the letter it said, out of 200,000 submissions to the Scholastic Art and Writing Awards, 20,000 were submitted to the poetry category. Out of those 20,000 submissions, 200 go on to win national medals. And out of those 200 people, 35 are chosen as semifinalists for the National Student Poets Program, which I've never heard of before. And 5 people out of those 35 semifinalists are chosen as national student poets. And I did the math, and that was like a 0.0025% chance that I could be chosen as a national student poet out of those 200,000 people. And I'm not telling you those statistics to like brag, but just to show how like absolutely terrifying it was for me. So I had to submit an application for this. And on that Saturday in March, I had everything for the application prepared except for a video of me speaking of my love for poetry and what it meant to me. And that was because I just couldn't film it. I thought if I really deserve to be the 5 people out of the 200,000, I should be like really special. I should be this published high school poet. I should be this world-class musician, artist, athlete, whatever. And I should have the perfect grades, the perfect resume. I should have my life figured out in order to meet the First Lady and present all of that to the world. Like, this is me. But I didn't have any of those things. At school, I was a pretty good student, but far from the best. And I'd submitted poems to writing competitions before, but I never won anything. And I didn't play any instruments or sports or anything that I thought a stellar student would do. And most of the time, I was kind of just studying for things that I didn't really care about or things I didn't really get excited about. One thing I did get excited about was writing and poetry, but I didn't really have time to do those, especially after high school started. I felt like this opportunity kind of just fell from the sky and landed in my hands, and I wasn't sure if I could make anything meaningful out of it. So let's rewind from me sitting and blanking out completely in front of this tripod to the real beginning. I wrote my first serious short story in 6th grade, and it was this total ripoff of a BBC documentary about whales. This documentary followed a mother whale and her calf as they navigated through the oceans, and I was really into this, partially because this was my really brief nature documentary obsession phase, and also because I was primarily interested in the way the story was told. I'd get super excited every time the mother whale and her baby would dodge a predator, and I'd get really sad every time they became tired or hungry. Then, in the end, I learned one fact from this viewing, which is great white sharks like to attack their prey from under the water. I remember watching the baby whale swim from the shallow tide and, in one splash, disappear in this flower of seawater. This image stuck out to me, and it inspired me to write a short story of my own. And the last sentence of my story was, "The shark's greatest tactic, surprise." I actually added my own personal flair to the story as well, because I separated each section with this graphic of sparkling stars, which I thought was super cool. But looking back, it was not a great aesthetic decision at all. I showed the story to my middle school teacher at the time, and to my surprise, he told me that he loved it. And that's the moment I thought, I'm a writer. I can tell a story from anything as long as I take the material and write it in my own voice, because that matters. So flash forward to high school, to today, and I'm still writing. I like to write poetry mostly, and I like to write poems that are a mixture of lyrical and narrative poems. They're lyrical in a way that I always write from my perspective, and they're narrative because it's a vessel I choose to tell a story with. I like to think of writing poetry as taking a snapshot of a moment in time, a cool slow-mo freeze frame kind of thing, and then taking a microscope and zooming in on all the details, whether they're major or minor. But I also grew up in a family of engineers, and I currently attend a rigorous STEM high school that focuses on science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. Fun fact that I found out while researching this talk is that the original acronym was SMET, which doesn't really have the same professional ring to it, so I'm glad they changed that. But at my school, my first year there, it's kind of hard to find people who had the same interests that I had. And sometimes I felt like there was a much heavier focus on science and technology courses instead of humanities and liberal arts. And I spent my first year of high school kind of partially adapting to this foreign, super competitive culture that I just entered, and the other part studying like crazy. I thought that studying by memorizing page after page in my textbook only to forget it by the next test, or by refreshing my grades online over and over again just so I can see each point rise and fall by 0.0028 points. These were the only ways for me to stay afloat, and if I didn't do this, I'd end up underwater like the baby whale for my story. I was always operating out of fear, out of this desire to conform to this pre-approved model of success, which is if you study hard, you'll get good grades, you'll get into good classes, and then you'll get a good job and go to a good college or whatever. And if you mess any of that up, you mess up your chance of success or of happiness in life. And over time, I felt like my own ambitions and goals weren't as important as getting an A in class. And for a while, I didn't write anything, and I was pretty depressed. But still, writing for me was a release. And after a long day at school, I'd come home completely exhausted, but I'd catch myself before I crashed completely, and I'd instantly gravitate towards my laptop keyboard to type up a short story or a poem. The minute I got a stanza down, it was like something was being lifted off of my shoulders, and now I was studying that something as it floated in the air in front of me, and I could look back at my past experiences with a different kind of energy or from a different angle or a different perspective. I wrote about trying to code in class and failing. I wrote about losing a friend, but in the good way, like putting my old stuffed animals away. I wrote about going on family vacations in China and the time I got chased around by a really persistent fake designer shoe vendor, which was really not a good time, but it happened. But no matter what these experiences were, poetry was a way for me to kind of reconcile and make my thoughts tangible, to not only touch them and feel them, but also to sculpt meaning out of them. Now, let's go back to the middle. It should have been easy for me to just hit record and start the video and just get the application over with, but I was blocked by all these self-doubts I had, by believing that my potential is defined by good grades or classes or whether or not I fit into this particular model of success. And I didn't fit into it at all. I thought about the nights I'd stay awake studying until my eyes hurt, or just never really be able to express myself the way I wanted, which was through writing throughout my school and daily life. I actually remember one time, my parents are actually not like the typical like tiger mom, tiger dad Asian parents. They're usually very supportive of what I have to do, like what I want to do. But one time I told my dad I wanted to be a writer when I grew up, and he was like, yeah, I support your decision to do whatever you want, Eileen. If you want to throw your life away, that's fine too. But I thought about just never being able to do what I really wanted in school and in life. Then I remembered another line from my ridiculous 6th grade whale story about the mother whale singing a song for her lost baby. And I remember the release and fulfillment that I got from writing and telling a story like that in the first place. And then I thought of another thing that my teacher at the time said when I showed him the story. He told me that I was a good storyteller. Then I thought, maybe I can write a story with my own voice, because that, as a writer and as a person, matters. And I didn't have to let my potential be defined by fear and anxiety. I didn't have to build my life around these insecurities. And I could operate out of genuine passion to do something instead of fear. And I could write poems studying that something, and I can feel that energy that I always feel when I'm writing. Finally, I thought, screw my math quiz on Monday. And I chose to focus on the application. Today, I am the 2015 Northeast National Student Poet. And yeah. Thank you. I was really scared that no one would clap, and it just went. But so my story didn't actually start when I shook the First Lady's hand. And it didn't take this National Student Poet Award or the fancy National Student Poet pin that I got with it, which I have misplaced many times. I'm sorry, Scholastic. But to remind me that my voice counts. It took only my own self-confidence to realize that maybe I do have something worth sharing to the world. I think that the genre of poetry is a powerful way to express this ideal. Anything that anyone has to say in a poem is 100% valid. And it doesn't matter if you say it through a sonnet or a villanelle or a haiku, or if you write it down on napkins, or maybe you perform it or you slam it. Poetry shows you that you deserve to have this little white space for a stanza, a place to write all of your thoughts without interruption. My favorite quote about poetry comes from Carl Sandburg, who said that poetry is the synthesis of hyacinths and biscuits. And at first, this quote made no sense to me, but I guess as I get older and the more experiences I have, I'm starting to realize that nowadays, I don't look at poetry as viewing things through a microscope, but more of seeing the world and yourself through a kaleidoscope. I like to think that I write poems like Jackson Pollock paints, and I know that kind of sounds like Kanye West comparing himself to Steve Jobs or Jesus. But I follow the thought, and it never ends, and I end up with these fragments of moments and spaces in time that don't really make any sense as individual parts. But when you hold those moments, those mundane moments of just being a teenager, or the messy, non-story arcness of life, and you place them with ethereal observations. You mix the worldly with the otherworldly, the hyacinths with the biscuits. This is why I write. This is what allowed me to submit a small poem to a writing competition I never thought I'd win, and I didn't even know what to expect out of it, but I did it because I loved it. But this is what allowed me to set up my camera in front of my desk on that Saturday in March, turn it on, and press record. Thank you.